In the middle of the South China Sea, the mightiest warship in the U.S. Navy suddenly went dark. 5,000 sailors trapped as systems failed one by one. Foreign vessels closing in, the situation turning dire with each passing minute. In the chaos of the command center, as senior officers frantically proposed increasingly desperate solutions, Admiral Reynolds silenced the room with a single gesture. He pointed toward a woman everyone had dismissed, overlooked, and humiliated. What happened next changed everything. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story of unexpected heroes interests you, consider subscribing for more true stories of remarkable people who changed everything when given their moment. The USS Valiant sliced through the South China Sea at dawn, its massive silhouette breaking the horizon like a man-made mountain of steel. 5,000 personnel, 4.5 acres of sovereign American territory, and enough firepower to level a small country, all propelled by the revolutionary Artemis power system that Navy brass had touted as unhackable and failure-proof. Lieutenant Commander Zephyr Blackwood knew better. She moved through the carrier's gray labyrinthine corridors like a ghost, saluted out of obligation but instantly forgotten. Her small office near the inventory management section had become her sanctuary and her prison. The wall behind her desk displayed her engineering degree and naval commendations, but nothing of her life before. The morning light filtered through the small porthole, casting shifting patterns across her workstation as she reviewed maintenance logs. Most officers would have delegated such tedious work, but Zephyr found patterns in the data that others missed. For the third time this week, she noticed anomalous power fluctuations in the cooling systems, tiny deviations that fell within acceptable parameters but followed a concerning pattern. "Lieutenant Commander," a voice called from her doorway. Junior Lieutenant Eames held a tablet, shifting uncomfortably. "Chief Engineer Prescott rejected your maintenance request again. He said, and I quote, 'Tell Blackwood to stick to counting spare parts.'" Zephyr's expression remained neutral as she accepted the tablet. "Thank you, Lieutenant." After Eames left, she unlocked her personal tablet and continued the unauthorized diagnostics she'd been running on Artemis. The anomalies had grown more frequent, tiny fluctuations that nobody else seemed concerned about. The pattern suggested something purposeful rather than random degradation. She closed her eyes briefly, a fragmented memory surfacing, a gleaming corporate boardroom, technical blueprints spread across a polished table, her voice rising as executives shook their heads dismissively. The memory dissolved as quickly as it had appeared. The ship's intercom crackled. "All department heads report to Briefing Room Alpha for Admiral Reynolds' inspection." Zephyr arrived at the briefing room precisely 3 minutes early, positioning herself at the back corner where she could observe without drawing attention. The room filled with officers sporting more impressive insignia, their conversations overlapping in a familiar social choreography that always excluded her. Admiral Reynolds entered with his entourage, and the room snapped to attention. Captain Merrick led the briefing, highlighting the carrier group's operational readiness. When the discussion turned to the Artemis system, Chief Engineer Prescott stepped forward with undisguised pride. "The system is performing beyond expectations, Admiral. Power efficiency is up 12% from our last deployment, and the new cooling protocols have virtually eliminated thermal throttling." Zephyr knew this claim contradicted her findings. She cleared her throat softly. "Sir, if I may?" Heads turned in surprise at her interruption. "Lieutenant Commander Blackwood has some theories about the cooling systems," Prescott interrupted with a dismissive wave. "With all due respect, inventory management should focus on counting spare parts, not questioning systems designed by quantum dynamics' best engineers." The Admiral's piercing eyes found Zephyr, his gaze lingering longer than necessary. "Is that right, Lieutenant Commander?" "Just noting some anomalies in the maintenance logs, sir." "Probably nothing." Reynolds nodded slowly. "Sometimes nothing is worth investigating. Carry on." Later that afternoon, the Admiral's entourage swept through the engineering deck. Zephyr stood at attention among the other officers as Reynolds examined the Artemis control center, his questions surprisingly technical for a flag officer. "The adaptive load balancing," he inquired. "How's it performing under combat simulations?" "Flawlessly," Prescott answered. "The system automatically prioritizes critical functions while maintaining overall efficiency." Zephyr bit her tongue. The logs showed microbursts of overcorrection in the load balancing algorithms, another anomaly Prescott had dismissed. As the inspection party moved on, Commander Prescott lingered behind. "Blackwood, I respect your attention to detail, but stop undermining my department with these wild theories. Next time, follow the chain of command." "The chain of command works both ways, sir," she replied evenly. "When I submit reports, they should be considered, not buried." "Reports based on what expertise exactly?" He smirked. "Your extensive background in inventory management?" She held his gaze but said nothing. Let him believe what he wanted. After her shift ended, Zephyr made her way to the carrier's observation deck. Twilight painted the horizon in deepening shades of purple and orange as the massive ship cut through darkening waters. Few crew members came here, preferring the recreation areas below decks, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the endless sea. Her tablet pinged with an alert from her diagnostic program. Unauthorized access to the Artemis subsystems had been detected, again. The third time this week. She expanded the notification, fingers tracing complex patterns of intrusion that others would have missed. Someone was methodically testing the system's boundaries, probing for weaknesses with a sophistication that suggested professional training. She started to compose a security report when a priority message flashed across all screens. Orders to reposition closer to Taiwan as a show of force. The carrier's tempo instantly accelerated. Zephyr felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. The timing was too perfect, too calculated, the mysterious probing of systems followed by sudden deployment orders. She hurried below decks, moving against the flow of personnel responding to new assignments. In her office, she initiated a deeper scan of the Artemis security logs, bypassing the standard monitoring systems using access protocols she wasn't supposed to have. The scan revealed what she feared. A dormant subroutine had been implanted weeks ago, designed to activate under specific operational conditions. She grabbed her secure phone to contact Admiral Reynolds directly. Protocol be damned. As she dialed, the ship's lighting flickered once, twice. Her screens flashed warning signals before going completely dark. For a moment, Zephyr stood frozen in the sudden darkness, the secure phone dead in her hand. Then, emergency lighting activated, bathing her office in dim red. The ship's alarm began to wail, not the familiar drill pattern, but the genuine emergency signal that most crew members had never heard outside of training. She moved instinctively, grabbing her tablet and emergency gear from a locker. The corridor outside was filling with confused personnel. A junior officer spotted her. "Lieutenant Commander, what's happening?" "Main power failure," she answered calmly, concealing her growing dread. "Report to your emergency station." Throughout the massive vessel, confusion was turning to concern. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination as Zephyr navigated toward the main engineering deck. She passed crew members whose training was warring with rising panic, their faces ghostly in the red emergency lights. A deafening bang reverberated through the ship, and Zephyr braced against a bulkhead as the deck seemed to shudder beneath her feet. The main engines had failed catastrophically. Moments later, the familiar hum of the auxiliary systems that should have engaged automatically remained ominously absent. In the Combat Information Center, screens went black in sequence like dominoes falling. Captain Merrick's voice cut through the chaos. "Report! Sir, complete power failure across all primary systems," the operations officer responded. "Backup generators, attempting to engage but failing to come online." "Impossible," Chief Engineer Prescott stammered, frantically working controls that no longer responded. "Artemis is designed with quintuple redundancies. Even if the main system failed, backups should engage automatically." "Well, they haven't," the captain snapped as reports flooded in from throughout the massive vessel. Flight deck elevators non-operational, weapons systems offline, radar and communications down. A junior communications officer raised her hand urgently. "Captain, we're detecting multiple contacts approaching our position. Chinese vessels, sir. They're offering assistance." The implications hung heavy in the air. A disabled American carrier, adrift in contested waters, with Chinese military vessels closing in. It was either a coincidence of catastrophic proportions or something far more sinister. Zephyr arrived at the engineering deck to find it in controlled chaos. Technicians manually checked systems by flashlight while officers shouted contradictory orders. She slipped past them toward a secondary access terminal that few knew existed, connecting her tablet to access emergency diagnostics. The interface confirmed her worst fears. This was no random failure or mechanical breakdown. The Artemis system had been attacked with surgical precision, targeting vulnerabilities that Zephyr had identified years ago, vulnerabilities that should have been fixed before the system was ever deployed. As oxygen recycling systems began to fail and temperatures started rising ship-wide, Admiral Reynolds called an emergency meeting of all department heads in the CIC. Zephyr made her way there, moving against the tide of growing panic that rippled through the carrier's darkened passageways. By the time she arrived, the situation had deteriorated further. The environmental officer was reporting oxygen concerns. Without cooling systems, sensitive equipment was failing, including ordnance safety systems. The communications officer confirmed multiple Chinese vessels had surrounded them in a formation that appeared helpful but effectively boxed them in. "We may need to consider evacuation protocols," Captain Merrick said gravely. The words hung in the air. A massive American carrier abandoned would be the naval disaster of the century, a humiliation from which the Navy might never recover. More concerning still was what would happen to the classified systems on board once foreign powers gained access. Through this crisis, engineers proposed increasingly desperate solutions, each one undermined by the comprehensive nature of the failure. Prescott's voice rose above others. "The Artemis core design is flawless. This has to be physical damage or operator error." From the shadows, Zephyr watched the discussion spiral. On her tablet, the attack signature became clearer. A progressive shutdown sequence hidden within routine system operations, triggered by their sudden power escalation when the orders came to reposition. A junior officer beside her glanced at her screen, eyes widening at the complex diagnostic display. "Ma'am, what is that?" Heads turned. The room gradually fell silent. Admiral Reynolds' voice cut through the quiet. "Lieutenant Commander Blackwood, you have something to contribute?" Zephyr stepped forward, suddenly the center of attention, in a room that had overlooked her for years. She connected her tablet to the emergency display, the diagnostic patterns reflecting in the stunned eyes of her superior officers. "The Artemis system isn't failing," she said with quiet authority. "It's been attacked." She tapped through several screens of evidence. "And I know how to fix it because I designed it." Silence crashed over the CIC like a physical wave. Every eye fixed on Zephyr Blackwood, the inventory officer suddenly claiming authorship of the Navy's most advanced propulsion system. Admiral Reynolds broke the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, before joining the Navy, Lieutenant Commander Blackwood was Dr. Zephyr Blackwood, Chief Architect of Quantum Dynamics Integrated Power Systems Division." Captain Merrick stared in disbelief. "That's classified information, Admiral." "So is the fact that Dr. Blackwood identified critical vulnerabilities in the Artemis design 3 years ago," Reynolds continued. "Vulnerabilities that quantum dynamics buried rather than address." The room's atmosphere transformed as understanding dawned. Chief Engineer Prescott's expression shifted from skepticism to horror as he realized how he'd treated the woman who had invented the systems he merely maintained. "When they refused to delay deployment," Zephyr explained, "I reported it to oversight authorities. Quantum Dynamics' legal team destroyed my credibility, my career." She met the Admiral's eyes. The Admiral was on the review board. He knew I'd enlisted to monitor the technology from the inside. "The system has been compromised through exactly the vulnerabilities I warned about," she continued, highlighting code on the screen. "Someone encoded a progressive shutdown sequence triggered by our increased power output when we received orders to reposition." "Who would have the expertise to do that?" Captain Merrick asked. "Someone with intimate knowledge of Artemis," Zephyr replied. "A current or former Quantum Dynamics employee, or someone they shared the specifications with." "You're suggesting espionage," the intelligence officer interjected. "I'm stating facts," Zephyr corrected. "The attack vector matches the vulnerabilities I documented 3 years ago, vulnerabilities that were supposed to be classified." The implications settled heavily over the room. 5,000 lives at risk, a multi-billion-dollar vessel disabled, and national security potentially compromised, all because corporate interests had prioritized deadlines over security. "Can you fix it?" Admiral Reynolds asked, cutting through the tension. Zephyr nodded. "I can force a manual restart, but it requires synchronized actions in 5 engineering sections simultaneously. She looked around the room. I need a team willing to follow my instructions precisely. No questions, no hesitations. Who will volunteer? The Admiral asked. Every hand in the room raised, including Prescott's. Prescott, Park, Ramirez, Okonkwo, and Singh, Zephyr selected. You'll each lead a team to one of the auxiliary control nodes. The rest of you maintain essential functions and prepare for potential system instabilities during restart. As Zephyr removed her uniform jacket to prepare for the intensely hot conditions in the lower engineering decks, officers gasped. Her arms were covered in intricate tattoos, not decorative imagery, but electrical schematics of the Artemis system itself, preserved in skin when she could no longer access the blueprints. Let's move, she ordered. We have less than 4 hours before systems reach critical failure. The team navigated through darkened passages by emergency lighting, carrying essential tools and communicating via hand radios. The carrier's massive interior had become a labyrinth of shadows and mounting dangers. Without ventilation, certain sections had already reached dangerous temperatures. Without circulation pumps, ballast was shifting unpredictably, causing the massive vessel to list slightly. In the main engineering section, temperatures approached 120 degrees as Zephyr directed precise adjustments to systems that were never designed to be manipulated manually. These bypasses were explicitly forbidden in the manual, Prescott noted as he worked beside her, sweat pouring down his face. I wrote that manual too, Zephyr replied without looking up. Some things weren't meant to be in writing. Why didn't you tell anyone who you really were? He asked, genuine regret in his voice. Zephyr paused, connecting a bypass circuit. Would you have believed me without the Admiral's confirmation? Or would you have reported me for claiming credentials I couldn't prove? Prescott had no answer. As they worked, Zephyr discovered something else. This isn't just a shutdown sequence. There's a data extraction routine embedded in the attack. She pointed to code fragments on her tablet. They're not just trying to disable us. They want our classified data. The Chinese vessels, Prescott realized. They're not offering assistance. They're waiting to collect. Or whoever compromised our systems is transmitting data to them, Zephyr agreed. She immediately radioed the CIC. Admiral, recommend immediate communications blackout. All frequencies, including emergency bands. We have evidence of data exfiltration. Understood, came the terse reply. While reconfiguring critical junctions, Zephyr uncovered evidence of the sabotage, a signature in the code that matched a contractor who had recently gained access to the systems. She passed this information to security teams. Throughout the carrier, the situation deteriorated. The medical bay reported heat casualties. The weapons officer warned of rising temperatures in the munitions storage. The XO calculated less than 3 hours of breathable air remained. In Engineering Section 3, Lieutenant Park's team encountered a physical sabotage device attached to a cooling manifold. Commander, we found something, Park reported. Looks like a remote-triggered incendiary device. Do not attempt to remove it, Zephyr ordered. Tag it for EOD and continue with the bypass procedure. Similar devices were discovered in 2 other sections, confirming that the attack was both digital and physical, requiring access that a remote hacker couldn't have achieved. The saboteur is on board, Captain Merrick's voice came through the radio. Focus on the restart, Admiral Reynolds commanded. Security teams are conducting a sweep. As Zephyr's team completed the complex bypass procedures, she received confirmation from each section. The trap was set. Now came the dangerous part. All stations report ready, came the radio call. Zephyr closed her eyes briefly, visualizing the massive system she had designed years ago, now corrupted but still salvageable. On my mark, 3, 2, 1. The synchronized actions triggered a cascading response through the system. Warning alarms blared as the ship seemed to groan under the strain. For 30 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, a low hum vibrated through the decks as auxiliary power engaged. Lights flickered on across the massive carrier. Cheers erupted through the ship as systems gradually returned online. Main propulsion restored at 30% capacity, Prescott reported, his voice thick with relief. Communications online, came another report. Weapon systems coming online, added the tactical officer. The timing couldn't have been better. The Chinese vessels had closed to uncomfortable proximity. ostensibly offering assistance but effectively surrounding the vulnerable carrier. "Send courtesy thanks to our Chinese friends," Admiral Reynolds instructed the communications officer. "Inform them their assistance will not be required." As systems stabilized, security teams cornered the suspected saboteur, a civilian contractor who had joined the crew during the last port call. When confronted with evidence, the man attempted to activate a dead man's switch that would have triggered the planted devices, but Zephyr's system reset had isolated his control mechanism. In the CIC, Admiral Reynolds addressed the assembled officers. "The immediate crisis is contained, but we remain vulnerable. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood, what's our status?" "I've implemented temporary patches to prevent another attack through the same vectors," she reported. "But Artemis needs a complete security overhaul. We're operational, but not at full capacity. Enough to get us to friendly waters?" "Yes, sir. I recommend Yokosuka Naval Base. Their facilities can support the necessary overhaul." The Admiral nodded. "Make course for Japan." He turned to the security chief. "What do we know about our guest?" "Not talking yet, sir. But his equipment is Chinese military issue, despite his American credentials." "Keep me informed." Reynolds dismissed the officers but gestured for Zephyr to remain. When they were alone, he spoke quietly. "You could have told them sooner." "Told them what exactly?" she asked. "That I was the whistleblower who nearly tanked the Navy's flagship propulsion program? That I enlisted under my real name but concealed my background because Quantum Dynamics had blacklisted me from the industry?" She shook her head. "They needed to respect the uniform, not a reputation they couldn't verify." "They respect you now," Reynolds observed. "They respect results," she corrected. "But that won't fix the underlying problem. Artemis has other vulnerabilities, sir. This attack exploited only one of them." "You'll have full authority to implement whatever fixes you deem necessary," the Admiral promised. "No corporate interference, no budget constraints, no bureaucratic obstruction." "I'll need that in writing," Zephyr said, "and I want oversight of all future Artemis deployments." Reynolds smiled slightly. "Already submitted the paperwork. Welcome back to your creation, Dr. Blackwood." 3 months later, the USS Valiant cut through Pacific waters under clear blue skies. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Zephyr Blackwood, now wearing the insignia of Advanced Systems Security Division, stood beside Admiral Reynolds reviewing new security protocols. "The saboteur confessed," Reynolds said, "part of a larger operation to force us into accepting rescue by Chinese vessels. They would have gained unprecedented access to our technology." "They almost succeeded," Zephyr acknowledged. "The Navy owes you a debt it can never repay," Reynolds said quietly. "Not just for saving the Valiant, but for enlisting after what Quantum Dynamics did to you. Lesser people would have walked away." "Lesser people did," she replied. "The executives who buried my security report for the sake of their stock options. The lawyers who discredited me rather than address the vulnerabilities." "They've been dealt with," Reynolds assured her. "The congressional investigation has already led to 3 indictments." "That won't fix the culture that created the problem," Zephyr noted. "As long as defense contractors prioritize profit over security, we'll remain vulnerable. Which is why your new division reports directly to the Secretary of the Navy," Reynolds reminded her. "No corporate filters, no administrative barriers." Later, as she stood alone on the observation deck, watching the sunset, just as she had the day of the attack, Captain Merrick joined her. "The crew's been talking," he said without preamble. "They're calling it the Blackwood Doctrine. Never assume expertise comes with rank or title." Zephyr smiled slightly. "There are worse legacies." "Why didn't you tell anyone who you really were?" he asked, the question that had circulated throughout the ship for months. Zephyr considered the horizon. "Some truth shouldn't need credentials to be heard, sir." "Well, you've certainly earned your credentials now," Merrick observed. "The Admiral tells me you're being considered for a commendation." "The real victory is the security overhaul," she replied. "All Artemis-equipped vessels are being retrofitted with the patches we developed. That's worth more than any medal." As they walked away, the massive carrier gleamed against the darkening sea, lights glowing from within, no longer vulnerable, no longer in the dark. And moving through its corridors, Lieutenant Commander Zephyr Blackwood walked with a different kind of presence now, no longer a ghost to be forgotten, but a legend in the making, proof that sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight, waiting for their moment to shine. The next day, as the Valiant continued its journey toward home waters, Zephyr found herself approached by junior officers and enlisted personnel alike, their expressions a mixture of respect and curiosity. The story had spread throughout the Navy like wildfire, a modern legend of redemption and vindication. In her new office, significantly larger and positioned near the command center rather than the inventory department, she reviewed security protocols for the entire fleet. On her wall hung her original design sketches for Artemis, declassified and returned to her as part of her official recognition. A knock at her door revealed Admiral Reynolds. "The Secretary of the Navy just confirmed your promotion to commander," he announced, effective immediately. Zephyr nodded, accepting the news with characteristic reserve. "Thank you, sir?" "There's more," Reynolds continued. "They want you to lead a task force reviewing all critical naval systems for similar vulnerabilities. Full access, complete authority." For the first time in years, Zephyr felt the weight of vindication. Not just personal redemption, but the opportunity to protect others from what she had experienced, to transform her personal crusade into institutional change. "When do we start?" she asked. "When do we start?" she asked. "Tomorrow," Reynolds replied. "In Washington. The Joint Chiefs want to hear directly from you." 6 months after the incident in the South China Sea, Commander Zephyr Blackwood stood before the Naval Systems Security Conference, a gathering of the Navy's top engineers, security specialists, and defense contractors. The auditorium fell silent as she approached the podium, her reputation now preceding her. "The Artemis incident was not a failure of technology," she began, her voice steady. "It was a failure of culture, a culture that values schedules over security, profits over protection, and silence over speaking up." From the back of the room, she spotted Admiral Reynolds nodding in approval. Beside him sat Captain Merrick and, surprisingly, Chief Engineer Prescott, who had requested reassignment to her task force. "Today, I present the Blackwood Protocols," she continued. "A comprehensive framework for identifying, reporting, and addressing security vulnerabilities in critical naval systems, regardless of who finds them or how inconvenient their timing might be." The presentation that followed was met with a standing ovation. Defense contractors shifted uncomfortably as she outlined new accountability measures, but the military personnel embraced the changes enthusiastically. The lesson of the USS Valiant had rippled throughout the Navy, transforming procedures and priorities. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, a young ensign approached her tentatively. "Commander Blackwood, I just wanted to say thank you. Your story inspired me to report a security flaw I found in our communications array. My CO actually listened," Zephyr smiled. "That's how change happens, Ensign. One voice at a time." As she gathered her materials, Admiral Reynolds approached with an older man in an expensive suit. "Commander, this is Senator Hargrove, Chairman of the Armed Services Committee." "Commander Blackwood," the senator extended his hand. "Your actions saved more than a ship. They potentially prevented a major intelligence breach and possibly averted an international incident." "Just doing my job, Senator." "Your job now includes testifying before my committee next week," Hargrove replied. "We're pushing legislation to protect military whistleblowers and establish independent security verification for defense systems. We need your voice." That evening, in her hotel room, Zephyr received a secure call from the USS Valiant. Captain Merrick's face appeared on the screen. "Thought you'd want to know, Commander. We just completed the full Artemis overhaul. The system passed all security protocols. Your protocols. How's the crew taking to the new procedures?" "They've named the security drill after you," Merrick chuckled, "calling it pulling a Blackwood when someone identifies a potential vulnerability." "Could be worse names," she smiled. "There's something else." Merrick's expression grew serious. "We found evidence that the Artemis attack may have been a test run. Intelligence believes similar vulnerabilities exist in other critical defense systems. The Pentagon is asking for your task force to expand its scope. The implications were clear. What happened on the Valiant could happen elsewhere, potentially with far more devastating consequences." "Tell them we'll need expanded authority and resources," Zephyr replied, "and complete transparency from every contractor involved." 1 year after the South China Sea incident, Commander Blackwood stood on the flight deck of the USS Invincible, the the newest carrier in the fleet and the first to be equipped with Artemis 2.0, a completely redesigned system incorporating all the security measures she had fought for. Admiral Reynolds, now the Chief of Naval Operations, stood beside her as the massive vessel conducted power-up procedures. "Full load test in 3, 2, 1, the bridge announced. The carrier hummed with power, every system coming online flawlessly. Secure pathways monitoring for any unauthorized access or unusual patterns. "You've created quite a legacy," Reynolds observed. "The Blackwood Doctrine is now standard training at the Academy." "The legacy isn't mine," she replied. "It belongs to everyone who speaks up when they see something wrong, regardless of the consequences." Speaking of consequences, Reynolds handed her a folder. "The President has authorized your promotion to captain, effective next month. You'll be taking command of the Invincible for her maiden deployment." Zephyr's eyes widened in surprise. "Sir, my background is in engineering, not command." "You demonstrated leadership under the most extreme circumstances imaginable," Reynolds countered. "Besides, this ship carries your systems. Who better to command her than the woman who designed them?" That evening, at the formal commissioning ceremony for the USS Invincible, Zephyr found herself addressing the assembled dignitaries, officers, and crew members. Among them sat several faces from the Valiant, including Prescott, who now served as an instructor at the Academy, teaching the security protocols he had once dismissed. "The true strength of our Navy lies not in our technology, impressive as it may be," she told the crowd. "It lies in our people and their willingness to speak truth even when it's inconvenient, to challenge assumptions even when it's uncomfortable, and to stand firm even when standing alone." As she concluded her remarks, the entire assembly rose in a standing ovation. From her position on the stage, she could see the transformation in how people looked at her, not with dismissal or skepticism, but with profound respect. Later, at the reception, she found a moment of quiet on the observation deck, watching the stars reflect off the dark Pacific waters. Chief Engineer Prescott joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "I never properly apologized," he said, offering her a glass, "for how I treated you on the Valiant." "You made up for it during the crisis," she replied, accepting the drink, "and every day since, implementing the security measures." "Still," he insisted, "I should have listened. We all should have." "That's the point of the Blackwood Doctrine," she smiled. "Now everyone will." They clinked glasses, the past forgiven, if not forgotten. "The enlisted personnel have a saying now," Prescott mentioned. "Never judge expertise by the uniform it wears." As the celebration continued below decks, Captain Zephyr Blackwood stood at the railing, contemplating the journey that had brought her here. From disgraced whistleblower to decorated officer, from ignored expert to respected leader. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but standing on the deck of a carrier that carried her systems and her protocols, she knew every step had been necessary. Her hand unconsciously traced the schematics tattooed on her arm, hidden now beneath. Her dress uniform, but forever part of her. Some battles left visible scars, others invisible ones. Hers had left her stronger, more determined, and positioned to ensure no one else would face what she had faced. A junior officer approached, hesitantly interrupting her thoughts. "Captain Blackwood, there's a call for you from SECNAV. Something about expanding the Blackwood protocols to all branches of the military." Zephyr nodded. "Tell them I'll be right there." As she turned to go, she cast one last glance at the vast ocean stretching to the horizon. The sea didn't care about rank or title, only competence and courage. It was an environment that forgave neither arrogance nor ignorance, where reality always had the final word. In that way, the Navy at its best operated on the same principles: merit over status, truth over convenience, substance over appearance. The Valiant crisis had forced a recognition of those principles, and Zephyr's new position would ensure they remained at the forefront. 2 years after taking command of the USS Invincible, Captain Blackwood found herself back in the South China Sea, the site of the original crisis. This time, she stood on the bridge of her own carrier, leading a multinational exercise designed to test new security protocols across allied navies. Admiral Katsuro of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force stood beside her, observing as the combined fleet executed complex maneuvers. "The Blackwood protocols have transformed our approach to system security," he commented. Our engineers now compete to find vulnerabilities before deployment. That's exactly the culture shift we needed, Zephyr replied. Security as a point of pride rather than an inconvenient afterthought. The exercise included a simulation of the very attack that had disabled the Valiant, now used as a training scenario. Crews responded with efficient precision, identifying, isolating, and neutralizing the threat without panic or confusion. When the exercise concluded successfully, Zephyr addressed the gathered officers in the Invincible's briefing room. 2 years ago, in these same waters, a single unaddressed vulnerability nearly cost 5,000 lives and a strategic asset. Today, you demonstrated that such an attack would fail against our collective defenses. After the briefing, she returned to the bridge to find a message waiting from Naval Intelligence. A familiar name caught her eye: Quantum Dynamics. The company that had discredited her and buried her security concerns had lost its naval contracts after the congressional investigation, but apparently had continued operations in the private sector. They're claiming to have developed a next-generation propulsion system, her intelligence officer reported, looking for commercial applications since they're blacklisted from military contracts. Any technical specifications available? Zephyr asked. None publicly, but sources suggest they've merely repackaged Artemis without the security upgrades. Zephyr considered this information carefully. Monitor the situation. If they're selling vulnerable systems to commercial shipping, that creates risks for everyone. That evening, as the fleet dispersed to continue separate operations, Zephyr received a visitor to her quarters. Admiral Reynolds, now retired but serving as a special advisor to the President on cybersecurity, had arrived unannounced. Captain, he greeted her warmly. The exercise was impressive. Thank you, sir. To what do I owe the honor? Reynolds placed a folder on her desk. The President is establishing a new division within the Department of Defense, Joint Forces Technical Security Command. Its mission will be to implement the Blackwood protocols across all military branches and critical infrastructure. Sounds like an important initiative, Zephyr observed. It needs the right leader, Reynolds replied. Someone who understands both the technical and human elements of security. Someone who's proven they'll stand by their principles regardless of personal cost. He tapped the folder. The President is offering you command with promotion to Rear Admiral. Zephyr sat back, momentarily speechless. From outcast to Admiral in 3 years was unprecedented. That's quite a leap, sir. Not for the woman who saved a carrier, transformed naval security, and is now recognized as the leading expert in her field, Reynolds countered. Besides, this role needs someone who understands what's at stake, someone who's seen firsthand what failure looks like. As Reynolds departed, leaving her to consider the offer, Zephyr stepped out onto her private observation deck. The lights of the Invincible reflected off the dark waters, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. Her mind drifted back to that fateful day when the Valiant went dark, when she stood in the shadows of the CIC as others dismissed her concerns. How different things might have been if someone had listened sooner, if expertise had been recognized regardless of rank or position. The new command would give her the opportunity to ensure that lesson was institutionalized throughout the military, that no valuable insight would be lost because of who delivered it rather than what it contained. She made her decision before returning inside. The path forward was clear, just as it had been in that darkened CIC when Admiral Reynolds had pointed to her and changed everything. 3 years to the day after the Valiant incident, Rear Admiral Zephyr Blackwood stood in the Pentagon briefing room addressing the Joint Chiefs and senior military leadership. The Technical Security Command has identified and remediated 173 critical vulnerabilities across military systems in our first year of operation, she reported. Each one represented a potential crisis averted, a potential loss prevented. Charts displayed the dramatic reduction in security incidents since the implementation of the Blackwood protocols. Statistics showed increased reporting of potential vulnerabilities at all levels of service. Most importantly, Zephyr concluded, we've created an environment where expertise is valued regardless of rank, where speaking up is rewarded rather than punished, and where security is everyone's responsibility. As the briefing ended to enthusiastic approval, she found herself approached by a young lieutenant with a familiar face. Admiral Blackwood, he saluted. Lieutenant Eames, ma'am, I served with you on the Valiant. I remember, she smiled. You delivered Prescott's rejection of my maintenance request. He nodded, somewhat embarrassed. That experience changed my career path, ma'am. I transferred to system security after witnessing what happened. I wanted to be part of the solution. That's the greatest legacy of the Valiant incident, Zephyr replied. Not just the protocols or the technology, but the people who learned from it. Later that day, in her Pentagon office, Zephyr received a secure call from the current captain of the USS Valiant, now equipped with all the security measures her team had developed. Admiral, the captain reported, we've just completed our annual security certification with 0 vulnerabilities detected. The crew wanted you to know. Please give them my congratulations, she replied. The Valiant will always hold a special place in my heart. After ending the call, she turned to the wall where a photograph hung, showing the darkened CIC of the Valiant during the crisis. It served as a daily reminder of what was at stake, of why her work mattered. Beside it hung her original security report on Artemis, the one quantum dynamics had buried, now framed as a historical document. And next to that, a simple quote that had become the unofficial motto of her command: "Expertise has no rank." Her assistant interrupted with news that the Secretary of Defense was waiting to discuss expanding the Blackwood protocols to NATO allies. As Zephyr gathered her materials for the meeting, she paused briefly at the photograph of the Valiant. From that moment of crisis had come transformation, not just for her personally, but for an entire institution. The woman no one expected had become exactly who was needed, at exactly the right time. And as she headed to her meeting, Admiral Zephyr Blackwood carried with her the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful weapon in any arsenal isn't technology or firepower, but the overlooked genius they never saw coming.